Hi class, this is chapter 6, Consciousness. Again, an interesting chapter. It's interesting because it's hard to define. If I ask, and I usually will start my class by asking them, what is consciousness? It's kind of hard to put your finger on it. It is a difficult concept to comprehend, and you're not going to be alone in that process. I'm just bringing up my notes here real quick here. Three major theories would say that consciousness is a global workspace. This global workspace is an area, not one particular part of the brain, where we bring all parts of the brain together. Like, for example, if I have a glass of say Kool-Aid, I'm gonna take a sip, and I'm gonna use a lot of different senses to figure out what that is. I'm gonna use my taste. I might lose my sight because it's red. I might use. I might have a feel to it. Those are examples of the global workspace where we use a bunch of things to come together to figure out what things are. And so they introduce a chapter page on the text here, kind of giving this example of sun beating down and the smell of things. So they really illustrate all those different types of senses that are brought together. It's also awareness occurs when neurons form together, the synchronization, and it's a learned process. It's what they call radical plasticity theory. Skill the brain acquires distinguishing low-level processing, like color objects, to higher levels, how the object functions. So those are three major areas. Kind of an overall thing, it involves the capacity to take in and process information before sending it to specialized areas of the brain for further use or storage. That's kind of maybe a textbook definition of it, but it's so much more than that. There are dimensions of consciousness, two major dimensions: wakefulness and awareness. Wakefulness is a degree of alertness. Awareness refers to the monitoring of information. And that's going to be important because when we look through the levels of consciousness, minimal, moderate, and conscious states, that it really kind of, those are key words that play a role there. For example, on minimal consciousness, we have a coma. It's a state of consciousness. The eyes are closed, person's unresponsive and unarousable. And then there's a vegetative state. And that's where the eyes are open, but the person is unresponsive. It's what they call wakefulness without awareness. And so that was always kind of a dangerous place to go. We would often think that, are they alive? Are they not alive? There was a big debate that went on probably about maybe 15, 20 years ago. Terry Schiavo, who had been married just briefly and was involved in some, I forget what type of accident it was, but she laid in a vegetative state for about 10 years. He remarried, but still wanted to have the best intentions for his wife. It's hard to get, his wife of past. I hate to say that she was divorced, but he said that she wanted to have life support removed. And so there's a big wrestle. Went to actually to the Supreme Court, and they finally decided that he could remove life support. And so what they did is she was able to breathe, but they no longer gave her food, and she eventually passed away. So the question is, if you're in a vegetative state, are you there? And so what they found is they did an interesting study where they would have an individual who's in a vegetative state. They would be talking to them and ask them to think about running through a field. And through MRIs, function MRIs, we were able to see that they were actually aware of what was going on. Their brain was imagining those parts in our brain that would be lit up, imagining running through a field, was lit up for them. And so it brings minimal consciousness to a new level. Moderate consciousness is kind of like that pre-conscious term that Freud uses. It's like the tip of the tongue phenomenon. I remember their name, but it's not right there. That's like moderate consciousness. And full consciousness, hopefully, is where you are right now, listening to me. Jumping around a little bit, got to hit some key things there. Attention and focusing consciousness. Attention is the key thing. In fact, over and over again when I'm testing somebody, if they're not able to attend, they're probably not going to do very well. And what we find is that attention is is quite a complex task. Most people are not able to do two things with two sensory modalities. That's why you can't text and drive at the same time. That's many times when it's difficult doing a complex task, a complex physical task, while having a conversation, a deep conversation at the same time. You'll stop and you'll have to do one or the other. So those are some of the interesting components to it. When we look at attention too, there is the inattentional blindness, which I always think is kind of cool. You'll see a film clip, I think on Oprah Winfrey, where a little gorilla walks out, or I may have a different film clip. But there's a film clip about inattentional blindness, where you're watching the ball, but you're not watching what happens there. You're counting the ball, and then lo and behold, you find out that there's a gorilla walking there. And so what happens is, with that, that's why you'll see on the highways, the highway patrolmen are just right there. You think that's probably not the best place to hide. But what they're counting on is inattentional blindness. I'm focused on getting to Flagstaff instead of who's on the highway, because I'm 30 minutes late. Let's see what else we've got here. And that multitasking is what they call the perceptual load theory. That's why, when even talking on the phone while you're driving can be challenging. Meditation is the next thing we're going to talk about as far as consciousness. Meditation is an amazing tool that's been used. I've got a film clip of Tibetan monks that through meditation can end up heating their bodies up. So that what they do is they'll put like wet rags, wet towels around them in this freezing room, and through meditation their body heats up, and you'll start seeing steam coming off of their towels. Just an amazing thing. Amazing role, and of course tremendous changes in our minds with meditation. There was a study that was done, I believe it was in Alabama, with these were individuals that were on death row. So these, they had multiple deaths. They're going to die in prison, and they are also the most likely to offend, to be an aggressive offender. And so what they did is they found, and usually with antisocial personality disorder, there's little empathy or no empathy for their victims. And so they gave them a carrot. If you do meditation, you get a color TV in your room or something like that to that effect. And what they found is that through meditation, that these guys were actually developing empathy. And they were feeling the pain that they inflicted on their victims. Pretty interesting, the changes that occur in our brain based off of meditation. In fact, I have a book called Zen and the Brain, which is a neuroscience book, which is kind of interesting to see the changes that occur within our brain based off of that. Sleeping and dreaming. Two essential features of sleep. There's a perceptual wall between conscious mind and outside world. That's why when we're sleeping and somebody knocks on the door, your front door, you incorporate that sound into your dream. That's what they're talking about. And also sleeping state can be immediately reversed, opposite from that minimal consciousness that we see in a coma or vegetative state. Looking at what else we want to talk about. Functions of sleep, three major functions, very, very, very important. One is it allows for neural growth to occur. Two, it helps us learn and remember. So what I will often tell my daughters is, if you want to remember something before you go to sleep, study it right before you go to sleep, and then you're going to repeat it 5 times. Usually we'll do 5 sleep cycles overnight, over an 8-hour period, and then you're going to be recalling that information over and over again in your sleep. Really, very, very effective. In fact, what we see with sleep deprivation is that it can have a negative impact on the hippocampus, that part of the learning. That's a part of the brain that deals with learning. They've done studies with mice that were sleep deprived to be able to remember how to get through mazes. Before they were able to do it, now when they're sleep deprived, they're confused, not able to do it. And the last thing that it does is it fights cell damage. Throughout the day, we're producing free radicals in our brain. And at nighttime while we sleep, there's enzymes that come out and destroy those free radicals, so it's so important. William Dement did some research on sleep deprivation with a guy named Randy Gardner, who he was awake for 11 days without caffeine. His parents were getting afraid because they used to think at that time, when this was back in 1964, that if you didn't sleep, you'd go crazy, irreversibly crazy, never go back to normal. And so only a teenager would do this. Remember last chapter we talked about that personal fable that nothing's going to happen to you? Well, he was a teenager, so that's what he did. He stayed awake for 11 days and began hallucinating and everything else. He did catch up with the sleep that he lost. And again, it was sleep deprived without caffeine. His friends would poke him and drop water on him and stuff like that to keep him awake. But what we found is that there was no permanent damage. I believe he sells insurance now. I don't know what that's about. Talks about sleep disorders, insomnia, sleep apnea, sleepwalking, narcolepsy, hypersomnia, night terrors. I do want to mention that because I have a lot of parents that come to me with their child and say, you know what, they're having night terrors. Can you give therapy for the child? And I always tell the parents that don't waste your money on that. The child's going to outgrow it. It's not going to be a problem. It's scarier for the parent than for the child. When they have those night terrors, it's not the rapid eye movement stage of active dreaming, which we're going to talk about in a minute. It's one of the stages prior to that. Which brings us to dreaming. The text has several theories of dreaming. There's the psychoanalytical Freud's Royal Road to the Unconscious. Jung's got a book on dreaming too, Carl Jung. Then there's the biological aim theory, and then there's the cognitive theory and combined theory. There are more theories that are out there besides those four, but those are just 4 ones that they've got. Hypnosis, another one. That's such an interesting topic. Usually I ask students, do you think it's real? Do you think it's not real? And we'll have a mixed bag. Some people say agree, some people disagree. What is interesting is the role that hypnosis plays. They've done several studies looking at using like a Stroop test. A Stroop test is kind of difficult to explain, but there's a lot of colors and shapes and everything else. And what they find is that normal individuals that are not under hypnosis have difficulty doing that task. But those same tasks that are under hypnosis and told just to focus on colors instead of shapes or the words. Actually, it's like red or white. So the word red will be written in maybe white color, or blue will be written in red color. And so the Stroop task is I tell you to switch to the word, switch to the color. You're stacking blue, blue, red, red, going back and forth. It's a little bit tricky to explain on a little brief video clip, but under hypnosis, they're able to perform that task much, much faster. Let's see. That was Amir Raz who did that Stroop test. I did want to mention too, because I have a friend of mine, although it's been years since I've talked to him, I can't recall his name. He did some interesting research down in Tucson. He worked with an individual with a developmental disorder. He had a delay, and what he did is this guy had warts on his hands. They tried everything they could, burning them off, cutting them off, medication. Could not get rid of these warts. And so usually what happens is when the medical profession can't figure it out, that's when they go to the shrink. So they went to my friend, my psychologist, and what he did is through meditation and hypnosis, he was able to raise the temperature in this young man's hands and burnt the warts off from the inside out. So that article was actually published in JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, illustrating just the power of hypnosis. It's really quite amazing. Then the last part they talk about is altering consciousness with drugs, and they talk about all the various types of substances that are out there, alcohol, hallucinogenics, it goes through the whole gamut of one. Yeah, I don't want to belabor the point for this video. And so with that said, guys, that is Chapter 6, Consciousness. I hope you enjoy it. Like I said, it's always fun for me to put this stuff together. And it is a blast teaching it. All right. Thank you so much, guys.